Jungkook suddenly leaves the group chat after a shocking voice message from Taehyung's mother surfaces. What did she say that made him disappear? You should have never trusted him, Taehyung. Not someone like Jungkook. The voice note ended, and silence swallowed the group chat. Taehyung's thumb hovered over the screen, frozen, the weight of his mother's words sinking in like cold water down his spine. The message hadn't been meant for all of them, just for him. Supposedly, but a technical mistake had sent it to the entire group chat instead. Jimin had read it 4 times. Hoseok stopped replying. Jin sent a single question mark before going silent. And Jungkook didn't say anything. His scene appeared in gray, and then 3 dots blinked below his name as if he were about to type, but nothing came. Instead, with a quiet pop, his profile disappeared from the chat. Left. The apartment was too quiet. Taehyung stood in his kitchen, his phone still trembling in his grip. The steam from his forgotten coffee fogged the window behind him. The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead. A pathetic hum that filled the oppressive silence. He felt at the moment Jungkook had left, not just from the group, but from something deeper. Like a thread had snapped between them. Something unseen, unspoken. Back in Jungkook's apartment, the world was a blur of motion and numbness. His phone lay screen down on the floor where it had landed. The voice played again in his head, over and over. Not someone like Jungkook. It wasn't the first time he'd felt like an outsider. But this was personal. This was Taehyung's mother, the woman who had hugged him after their first award show, who once cooked kimchi stew for him when his throat was sore, who used to call him Golden Boy, like it meant something. Not someone like Jungkook. What did she mean? Did she always think that? Was it about his tattoos? His upbringing? The rumors? He didn't cry. Not yet. Not even when he stood in the middle of his living room, his hands still clutching the hoodie Taehyung had left last week. The navy blue one. The one Jungkook wore when he couldn't sleep. The one that still smelled like cedar and citrus and memories. His breath shook as he whispered the words to himself. Not someone like me. The group chat was supposed to be a sanctuary. A digital fireplace for their jokes, check-ins, and late-night confessions. But now, every unread message was a wound. Jimin tried calling, but Jungkook didn't answer. Namjoon sent him a separate message. You okay? No reply. Not even a reaction. Yoongi, usually silent, sent a single sentence. Whatever it is, come home. But home felt foreign now. Taehyung replayed the voice note, this time alone. This time in his bedroom where no one could see his expression. His mother's tone had been sharp, clipped, like she was warning him. He's reckless, unpredictable. He'll bring you nothing but regret. You're too trusting, Tae. The worst part? She'd said it with love. The kind of love that blinds. The kind of love that wounds when it's trying to protect. He called her. Why did you send that to everyone? Her voice was calm. I didn't. I sent it to you, Tae. Maybe it's good the others heard it. Especially him. He stared at the ceiling. You don't even know what he's been through. What we've all been through together. I know enough, she said coldly. And I see how you look at him. That's not just friendship, Taehyung. The line went dead. Meanwhile, Jungkook was packing a small duffel bag. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't stay in the apartment surrounded by reminders. Every photo, every poster, every mug on the counter whispered of before. Before that message. Before the fracture. Before he remembered why he kept his walls so high in the first place. It wasn't just the message. It was what it awakened in him. Old insecurities, long buried. The ones about never being enough. The quiet fear that no matter how hard he worked, how perfect he tried to be, someone would always think less of him. That someone would always whisper, not someone like Jungkook. He left Seoul by train that night. No announcements, no goodbyes, only a single text sent to one person, Jimin. Tell Taehyung I get it, and I'm sorry for making it harder. Jimin stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't reply. He forwarded it to Taehyung with no caption. Let him read it. Let him feel the gravity of what was unraveling. Taehyung didn't sleep. He went out at midnight, driving aimlessly through empty streets lit by neon signs and the occasional street lamp. He ended up near the Han River, where they used to ride bikes and talk about dreams too big for their mouths. He remembered the time Jungkook laughed so hard he fell into the water. He remembered the cold night they stood side by side and didn't say anything but understood everything. And now there was only static. The media found out within hours. Fans noticed Jungkook had unfollowed a few accounts. Someone leaked that he'd left a group chat. Army Twitter exploded. Hashtags trended. Speculation ran wild. But no one knew the truth. Not even Taehyung. Not fully. He visited his mother days later. She offered tea like nothing had happened. "Do you hate him?" Taehyung asked. She looked up. "No, I just don't want you getting hurt by someone who doesn't know what he wants." Taehyung's voice cracked. He knew. I was the one who didn't. Her expression faltered, but only for a second. "You'll see with time." He walked out before finishing the tea. 3 days passed before Jungkook finally answered a call. It was from Jin, of all people. The oldest, the anchor. "You don't have to come back," Jin said softly. "But at least tell me, was she right?" Jungkook didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Then finally, "I don't know. Maybe." But maybe wasn't yes, and maybe wasn't no. It was a crack in the door. Over the next week, no one mentioned the group chat again. They created a new one, Silent Agreement. Jungkook's name wasn't added, but his presence lingered, like a shadow at the edge of every message. Taehyung still read the old messages late at night. He never deleted the thread. He couldn't. Some nights he hovered over the Add Member button, but he didn't press it. Until one night, when he opened their old photo album, the one labeled Hyungline Chaos, and saw a picture of Jungkook asleep on his shoulder during a tour. His thumb hovered, then tapped, added, Jeon Jungkook. No words, just a quiet invitation. And somewhere, in a dimly lit room far from Seoul, Jungkook stared at his phone, his heart pounding, wondering if it was time to stop running. Jungkook didn't open the group chat right away. The notification lingered at the top of his screen like a whisper he wasn't ready to hear. He sat still on the edge of a stiff hotel bed in a city far too quiet for someone like him. The lights were dim, filtered through gauzy curtains, casting soft shadows across his face. He wore the same hoodie for 3 days now, and the faint scent of Taehyung's cologne clung to it like a fading memory. His thumb hovered over the message. Not from Jimin, not from Namjoon. From the chat itself, it simply read, "You were added by Kim Taehyung." That was it. No dramatic message, no apology, no plea. Just a silent act. Jungkook's throat tightened, his jaw clenched. He pressed the screen off and tossed the phone aside like it burned. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow alleyways, dragging leaves across the sidewalk like they were running from something. He stood, walked toward the window, and leaned his forehead against the cool glass. Seoul felt far away, but the ache inside him was closer than ever. He had told himself he left to clear his head, to find space, but space had turned into isolation. The silence wasn't healing anymore. It was echoing, mocking. Every reflection in every mirror showed him a face that felt more hollow than the day before. Meanwhile, Taehyung sat in his studio, fingers tangled in his own hair, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had sent the invite on instinct, not strategy. He didn't rehearse what he'd say if Jungkook responded. He didn't even know what he wanted anymore. All he knew was that ever since that message from his mother, something had shifted in the core of everything he believed in. He loved her, he always would, but her words had struck something sacred. She had crossed a line, whether she knew it or not. He tried to understand her, tried to forgive her, but something about the way she had said, "Not someone like Jungkook," still made his stomach twist. He hadn't told anyone what those words triggered in him. Not even Jimin, who had tried countless times to open the topic. Jimin was careful now, treading lightly, like they were all walking over thin ice. The tension among the members had become palpable, like the space between two magnets refusing to connect. Conversations felt shorter. Meetings ended with forced laughter. They all knew something was off, and no one dared name it. Namjoon, as leader, had tried to mend it. He called Jungkook the night before, but it went to voicemail. He sent him an audio note, calm and measured, saying things like, "Take your time," and "We're still here." But there was something in his voice, a tremor that betrayed the weight he carried. He too had heard the voice note. He too felt the fracture ripple through the group like a fault line that had waited too long to crack. Yoongi said less, but observed more. He noticed how Taehyung would check his phone more often now, how his hands fidgeted when no one was watching. He noticed how Jungkook hadn't updated anything on Instagram in days, how his Spotify activity had gone dead. In their world, silence was loud. And Jungkook's silence was deafening. Jin was the first to say what no one dared to admit out loud. "He's hurt," he told Taehyung one evening after practice. "Not just because of what she said, but because of you not saying anything when she did." That was the dagger. Taehyung didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He knew Jin was right. The problem wasn't just his mother's voice. It was his own silence. It had screamed louder than anything else. In the hotel, Jungkook finally picked up the phone. The group chat icon blinked once more. He tapped it. The messages inside were mostly mundane. A sticker from Hobie, a gif from Yoongi, a vague message from Namjoon that simply said, "Dinner this weekend?" But it was the lack of acknowledgement, the way no one mentioned the incident, that made Jungkook pause. It was like they were all trying to pretend the explosion hadn't happened, that the pieces weren't still scattered around them. He clicked on Taehyung's name. The chat between them was still there, filled with months of messages, voice notes, photos, and stupid inside jokes. He scrolled up to the last message Taehyung had sent before everything broke. It was a meme of a cat wearing sunglasses with the caption, "Mood." Jungkook almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. He typed, deleted, typed again, paused. Then finally, he sent a single word. "Why?" Taehyung saw it instantly. His heart stuttered. He stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. "I didn't know she felt that way." Then another message. "I should have defended you. I froze. I was wrong." Jungkook read them, over and over. Then he typed back. She sounded like she meant it. Taehyung didn't deny it. He couldn't. So he wrote, "She doesn't see what I see." There was a pause, a beat, then a reply. "What do you see?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy, raw. Taehyung didn't hesitate this time. Someone who stayed even when everyone else walked away. Another message. Someone who never asked for anything but gave everything. Then finally, "Someone I should have protected." Jungkook blinked back, the sting in his eyes. The words hurt more because they were true, and yet they felt like balm on an open wound. They kept talking, slowly, carefully, like navigating a broken bridge in the dark. Every word a step forward, every reply a test of balance. Jimin joined later, sending a heart emoji and nothing more. But Jungkook reacted to it, a simple like, that alone felt like a door opening. Hoseok, seeing the signal, sent a voice note singing a ridiculous song in a falsetto, making everyone laugh. Even Jungkook sent a voice note back, mimicking the tone, laughter trembling in his voice. The group chat came back to life, not instantly, but like a garden touched by early spring. Not fully bloomed, but no longer frozen. Taehyung visited his mother again weeks later. He sat across from her, calm but unwavering. "I love him," he said plainly. "As a friend, as family, maybe more. But I love him, and nothing you say will change that." His mother sighed, not with anger, but with something closer to weariness. "I only wanted to protect you." "From what?" Taehyung asked. "From someone who's been there for me more than anyone else?" She didn't respond. The silence was answer enough. Back in the city, Jungkook stood at the door of the studio where they all met again for the first time. His heart raced, but when he walked in, the others were already there, laughing over snacks. No one made a big deal. No dramatic hug. Just Hobie tossing him a bottle of water, Jimin nudging him playfully, and Namjoon patting his shoulder with a nod. Taehyung didn't say much, but when their eyes met, something passed between them, a quiet promise. The kind that needed no words. The studio smelled of old wood, fresh coffee, and the faint metallic scent of microphone stands that had seen years of memories carved into their weight. Jungkook stood just inside the doorway, motionless for a second too long, his black boots still wet from the drizzle outside. No one turned immediately. No one gasped or made a scene. But the moment crackled with unspoken tension, like a string pulled taut across a stormy sky. He had come back, but he was still deciding whether he belonged. Namjoon caught his eye first, his lips tugging into a quiet smile that didn't push or demand. It simply acknowledged him. The kind of leader who didn't need words to make someone feel seen. Then Yoongi, head tilted slightly, barely nodded, but his gaze lingered just long enough to whisper, "I'm glad you're here." Jungkook took a breath and stepped in, letting the door click shut behind him. The sound was small, but it felt like a door closing on weeks of confusion, distance, and questions that still burned at the edges of his chest. Taehyung was seated near the back, guitar resting against his knee, his fingers absent-mindedly strumming an open string that barely hummed. He hadn't looked up yet, but Jungkook could feel his presence like gravity. Jimin was the one who broke the surface tension, walking over with that classic crooked grin that always seemed one heartbeat away from laughter or tears. "You look like you lost a fight with a cloud," he said, flicking at Jungkook's damp hoodie. Jungkook huffed a breath that was almost a laugh, and Jimin pulled him into a side hug that was more grounding than anything else. It was fast, effortless, but it meant everything. Just like that, they slid into old rhythms. Not entirely smooth, not without fractures, but like puzzle pieces that had been bent slightly and still somehow fit. The day moved slowly. No heavy conversations, no sit-downs or explanations, just music, beats, melodies. Jin cracked terrible jokes that made Hobie snort laugh and made even Yoongi chuckle behind his hand. Taehyung still hadn't spoken to Jungkook directly, but their eyes kept finding each other across the room accidentally, then not. When Jungkook laid down a vocal take, he caught Taehyung watching him, not studying, not judging, just watching. Like someone relearning a face they thought they knew by heart. It wasn't until late into the night, when the others had scattered out for dinner, that they found themselves alone. Taehyung stayed behind, pretending to tune the guitar he wasn't playing, and Jungkook stayed behind pretending to organize files he wasn't saving. The silence between them was thick but not cruel. It breathed. It waited. Jungkook leaned against the edge of the console desk, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. "Did you mean it?" he asked finally, his voice low, cautious, like he didn't want to break whatever fragile piece was beginning to form. Taehyung didn't ask what he meant. He knew. He placed the guitar down gently, the strings vibrating once as he did. He looked up, eyes dark and tired, but unwavering. "Yes, and I hated that it took me losing you to say it." Jungkook looked at him then, jaw clenched, lashes low. "I didn't want you to choose between me and your family." Taehyung shook his head. "You didn't ask me to. She did. And I chose wrong." There was something in his tone, remorse, but also anger. Not at Jungkook. At himself. At the system. At the way love and loyalty sometimes collided so violently they left bruises no one could see. "You didn't say anything for days," Jungkook whispered, voice catching. "I thought you agreed with her. That I was... less." His throat tightened. "That maybe I never really belonged with all of you. That I was just a phase." Taehyung moved closer slowly, like one would approach a bird too afraid to stay. "You've never been a phase," he said, each word deliberate, like they were being carved into stone. "You've been the heart of this, Jungkook. My heart too. And I was a coward for not saying it when it mattered." The room fell silent again, but this time it held something softer, the weight of clarity. Jungkook blinked slowly, biting the inside of his cheek. "She still hates me, doesn't she?" Taehyung's jaw worked, then he answered. "She's wrong about you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to both of us." Jungkook's lip quirked into the ghost of a smile. "That's a long time." Taehyung stepped close enough to touch him, but didn't. "I'm not going anywhere." Their eyes met, the distance closed, not with a dramatic embrace or sudden confession, but with the quiet understanding of two souls learning how to forgive, how to rebuild, how to stay. The following weeks were filled with new patterns. Messages filled the group chat again, some chaotic, some simple. Jungkook stayed, not just in the thread, but in the rooms, in the conversations, in the laughter that slowly found its way back. He visited Taehyung's place again, sat on the same couch where they used to argue about movies and eat ice cream out of the same bowl. They didn't talk about the voice note anymore. They didn't need to. The damage had been done. But so had the healing. Taehyung's mother didn't reach out. Not right away. But one day, she sent a package. Inside was a photo frame. One of the earliest photos of BTS all together. Young and bright-eyed, cheeks full and dreams even fuller. Behind it A handwritten note. He was always one of us. I was wrong. That was it. No flourish. But it was something. Taehyung showed it to Jungkook without saying anything. Jungkook read it and simply nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he put it down. Things didn't return to what they were. They changed, evolved, deepened. Jungkook started writing songs again, real ones, the kind that bled. Taehyung joined him in late-night sessions that turned into sunrise quiet. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But the music said what they couldn't. And the rest of the group noticed how the tension ebbed, how the laughter got louder, how the music felt honest again. One night, as they walked along the Han River together, both hooded against the wind, Taehyung turned to Jungkook and said, "I didn't just choose you now. I always did. I was just too scared to say it when it counted." Jungkook looked up at the stars, soft smile on his lips. "I know. I just needed to hear it." They stood there for a while, side by side, shoulders brushing, breaths visible in the cold. There was no rush, no need to define what they were or weren't. They had walked through fire and silence and come out still standing. That was enough. Jungkook never left the group chat again. The studio lights had long dimmed, casting soft, golden shadows over the lingering silence between them. The only sound left was the faint hum of the mixing board and the distant buzz of a street lamp outside. Jungkook sat alone now, long after the others had gone, fingers tracing the edges of a lyric sheet not yet used, heart still caught somewhere between hope and habit, between the weight of what had been said and the gravity of what remained unspoken. The room still carried the echo of Taehyung's voice, not just in the walls, but in the way Jungkook's chest tightened every time he remembered the tremble behind Taehyung's apology, the way he had stood too close and said too little, and yet everything. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the music from unfinished tracks bleed softly into the quiet, as if the melodies could mend the aching pieces inside him. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, a slow drizzle at first, then heavier, like the sky itself was releasing all it had held back, and he welcomed the sound of it, the way it washed against the windows, cleansing, relentless. Somewhere in that storm, his phone buzzed once. A message from an unsaved number. "You don't have to forgive me, but I hope someday you will." No name, but he knew it was her. Taehyung's mother. Jungkook stared at it for a long time, the rain sinking with the pounding in his chest. He didn't reply. Not because he hadn't heard her, but because he wasn't ready. Forgiveness wasn't a door he could open with a single gesture. Not when the words had cut so deep. Not when they'd resurfaced wounds that went back to childhood. Back to days he spent proving he was worth the space he took up, worth the love he was given, worth being chosen. That voice note hadn't just hurt because of what was said, it had hurt because it mirrored every echo of doubt he carried in secret. He stood up, walking toward the glass, pressing his forehead against the cool surface as the city lights blurred behind the droplets. And in the reflection, he didn't just see himself anymore. He saw the younger version of him. The one who smiled too brightly to hide how he feared being left behind. The one who tried too hard to be perfect for people who never looked twice. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself, reminding his present self that he wasn't that boy anymore. Not entirely. Not when Taehyung had looked him in the eyes and said, "I choose you." The next morning, he arrived early. Not to prove anything, just to be there. The studio was empty when he stepped inside, but the coffee machine had already been used. Taehyung was near. He placed his bag down, the leather thudding softly against the floor, and he sat by the piano, fingers brushing across the keys. The notes he played were quiet, hesitant then gradually filled with warmth, like he was telling a story without needing to write it down. When Taehyung finally stepped in, they didn't speak at first. He listened. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes unreadable, but something in his stillness softened. When the last note faded, Jungkook looked up. "You still think she's wrong?" he asked. Not bitter, just tired. Taehyung walked over slowly, sitting beside him, close enough for their knees to touch. "I know she's wrong," he said, voice steady. "And I'm sorry I let her words hang over us like truth. They weren't." Jungkook didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. Taehyung's fingers found the keys, joining him in a gentle harmony. Something spontaneous, unfinished, but beautiful in its imperfection. That was the moment they began again, not with grand gestures, but with shared silence, with melody, with breath between notes. Later that day, the rest of the members arrived one by one. No one mentioned the message. No one needed to. They felt the shift in how Jungkook smiled more easily now, how Taehyung's shoulders sat lighter, how the energy that once fractured them had started to melt into something whole again. Jimin watched quietly, always the observer, always the one who noticed before anyone else. He leaned against the wall during rehearsal, whispering to Namjoon. "He's healing." Finally, Namjoon nodded, eyes on the two figures at center stage, voices blending as they harmonized a verse that had never quite worked until now. Something about their timing was different. Something about the way they moved, not just in sync, but in understanding. Days turned to weeks, and schedules picked up again. Interviews resumed. Photo shoots. The press began speculating as always, asking if the group chat rumor was true, if there had been a rift, if someone had left. They denied nothing, but revealed little. Sometimes, Yoongi told one reporter, "You need silence to remember how much you want to speak again."
Fans noticed the change too. How Jungkook laughed more during lives, how he leaned toward Taehyung in photos again, how the glances shared between them seemed to carry deeper stories than any words could capture. But the biggest shift came not from the public, but from what they did behind closed doors. One evening after practice, Jungkook pulled Taehyung aside. "Do you think your mom will ever fully accept me?" Taehyung paused, then answered honestly, "I don't know, but I know I do, and maybe that's enough." Jungkook looked at him, really looked at him, and in his eyes he saw not just the man who once hesitated, but the man who now stood firm. "Okay," Jungkook said, voice soft. "Then let's keep going." That night they wrote a song together, a song about doubt and distance, about belonging and coming home. It didn't name names, it didn't need to. But when the chorus swelled with the line, "I stayed because you saw me," they both knew what it meant. And when the demo leaked months later and the fans cried about the rawness, the honesty, they still never confirmed who it was for. Some things didn't need confirmation. They just needed to be felt. And through all of it, Jungkook never left the group chat again. Not because everything had healed perfectly, but because they were choosing every day to show up anyway, to listen anyway, to stay. The night they finished the demo, the sky outside was the color of ash, soft mist clinging to the edges of the window like the past refusing to let go. Inside the studio, the lights were dimmed to a low amber glow, casting both of them in a golden haze that made the space feel sacred, like a chapel for all the things they couldn't say out loud. The speakers played back the final chorus softly, the sound floating through the room like a memory caught mid-breath. Jungkook sat on the couch, one leg folded beneath him, eyes fixed on nothing and everything, the lyrics still lingering in his head even after the music faded. Across from him, Taehyung leaned against the edge of the desk, his fingers tapping against his thigh in rhythm, gaze flickering toward Jungkook more times than he would admit. They hadn't spoken since the last take. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, it was full, charged, healing. When Jungkook finally looked up, Taehyung didn't pretend to look away. They stared at each other for a moment that stretched beyond time, beyond apology, beyond the need for explanations. Jungkook's voice came out low, not quite steady. "That song, it's the closest I've ever come to saying everything." Taehyung nodded slowly. "Me too." And for a second, everything felt aligned. Their pain, their forgiveness, the love that had always existed between them in forms neither of them had dared to name. It was there now, laid bare in lyrics and chords and raw vocal takes that cracked when the truth threatened to bleed through. In the days that followed, things changed quietly. Jungkook started staying later after rehearsals. Taehyung found himself waiting for him, even when he didn't need to. The rest of the members noticed the shift, how the air between them was softer now, not fragile but careful, like a porcelain cup glued back together and held with reverence. Jimin was the first to tease them gently, dropping comments that danced on the edge of truth. "You two writing a whole album or just pretending to fix one song over and over again?" He'd laugh, but his eyes always held warmth. Jungkook would roll his eyes and shove his shoulder lightly. Taehyung would just smile and keep playing his guitar. They didn't deny it. Whatever it was, whatever was becoming, it didn't need a label yet. It just needed time. They gave it that. But time, as always, moved differently in their world. The label wanted a new press cycle, the media wanted answers, the fans demanded comebacks, and the machinery of fame spun relentlessly. They found themselves seated across from each other on a televised talk show one afternoon, bright lights harsh against their skin, hosts peppering them with questions that smiled but sliced. "So Jungkook, any truth to the rumor that you left the group chat after some family drama?" The question was posed with a laugh, like a joke, like it hadn't opened a scar. Jungkook blinked, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Taehyung turned his head toward the host, something sharp flickering in his eyes. "I think we all go through things privately," he said calmly, "but what matters is that we choose to come back." The room stilled for a second. The host smiled, the audience clapped, the cameras cut to commercial. But the weight of those words lingered long after. At night, Taehyung received a text from his mother. No pleasantries, just, "I watched the show, I see it now." He didn't reply. He simply set the phone down and looked across the room at Jungkook, who was sitting by the balcony, hoodie pulled over his head, a cup of tea in his hand, lost in thought. Taehyung walked over and sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, gaze following the city lights below. "She saw it," he murmured. Jungkook didn't ask who, he already knew. He sipped his tea and whispered, "Good." That was all. The days kept moving. The song they'd written became more than just a demo. It was selected as the centerpiece of the upcoming album, and the label, after some convincing, agreed to let them perform it as a duet. The news hit ARMY like a storm. The hashtags trended for hours. Fans dissected every lyric, every pause, every glance during the teaser clip. The speculation was relentless, but neither of them flinched. They had already been through worse than rumors. They had already survived silence. What more could words do? On the day of the live performance, the tension backstage was electric. Jungkook sat in front of the mirror, adjusting his earpiece, his chest rising and falling a little too fast. Taehyung walked in quietly, carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed one over without a word, then sat beside him, their reflections side by side in the mirror. "You ready?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook glanced at him. "I'm not sure." Taehyung smiled, the kind of smile that held the weight of years. "Then I'll be enough for both of us." And somehow, that was exactly what Jungkook needed to hear. The lights dimmed. The intro began, the first chord struck. And when Jungkook opened his mouth to sing the first line, his voice didn't tremble, it soared, clear, honest. And when Taehyung joined him, their harmony didn't just blend, it bled into the room, into every camera, into every heart that listened. The song wasn't about spectacle. It was about survival, about coming undone and learning how to be whole again. The final lyric echoed, "I stayed because you saw me." And in that moment, the audience fell away. The cameras, the expectations, it was just them. 2 voices, 1 truth. When the song ended, there was a beat of silence before the crowd erupted. But Jungkook didn't hear it. He looked at Taehyung, eyes glassy, chest heaving, and Taehyung smiled at him, something quiet and proud in his gaze. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. The moment had already done what years of trying hadn't. It had healed something. Backstage, the members surrounded them with praise and laughter, but it was Jimin who wrapped his arms around both of them and whispered, "You guys saved each other." Neither of them denied it. Later that night, long after the show had ended and the fans had gone to sleep, Jungkook found himself standing on Taehyung's balcony again, the wind gentler this time, the city breathing slower. Taehyung stepped beside him, handed him a warm blanket, and they stood there for a while, watching the night stretch endlessly before them. "It's strange," Jungkook said, voice low, "how close we came to never talking again." Taehyung nodded. "But we didn't let go." Jungkook turned to him, something soft in his expression. "Would you have come back for me if I hadn't replied?" Taehyung didn't flinch. "I would have waited until you did." Jungkook smiled, not the stage smile, not the polite one, but the real one, the one only a few people had ever truly seen. "I'm glad I did." And Taehyung, without hesitation, whispered back, "Me too." The next morning, the world buzzed with reactions, headlines, speculation, praise. But neither of them checked their phones. They slept late, the kind of sleep that comes only after you've let go of something heavy. The kind of sleep that signals the beginning of something new. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains like a slow, golden breath, brushing over the quiet corners of Taehyung's apartment, casting long shadows against the walls still humming with the memory of the night before. Jungkook stirred first, half buried beneath the blanket draped lazily across the couch, where he'd fallen asleep sometime after 3 a.m., the warmth of the performance, the adrenaline, and the intimacy of shared silence finally giving way to the kind of rest that hadn't touched him in months. His eyes fluttered open slowly, lids heavy, heart calm in a way that felt foreign but safe. He didn't move for a long time, just watched the sun crawl across the ceiling, his fingers clutching the edge of the throw like it tethered him to something fragile and precious. In the kitchen, he could hear the faint sound of movement, soft footsteps, a cupboard opening, the gentle clink of ceramic, and he knew it was Taehyung without needing to look. There was a rhythm to his presence, a quietness that filled the room without demanding space, and Jungkook found comfort in that rhythm, in the familiarity of two lives that had twisted around each other like vines trying to climb out of the dark. When Taehyung appeared with a mug in each hand, he didn't speak right away. He placed one on the low table near Jungkook and sat down across from him, pulling his legs up to sit cross-legged, his hoodie slipping off one shoulder. He looked tired but peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after you stop pretending everything's fine and finally admit the truth to someone who still chooses to stay. Jungkook sat up slowly, brushing sleep from his eyes, and reached for the mug, his fingers brushing against Taehyung's briefly, warm skin, steady contact, something that sent a quiet shiver through his chest. They drank in silence, letting the moment stretch, unspoken thoughts threading the air between them like invisible cords. Finally, Taehyung spoke, his voice still rough with sleep. "I keep thinking about that night, about how close I was to losing you completely." Jungkook didn't look away. "You did for a while." Taehyung nodded, accepting it, letting the truth sit between them. "And I hate myself for that, for the silence, for not fighting harder." Jungkook set his cup down, curling his fingers together in his lap. "I was angry, not just at you, at everything." Her voice brought back things I thought I'd buried, things I never told you. Taehyung leaned forward slightly, his gaze searching. "Then tell me now." And so Jungkook did. He spoke slowly, carefully, unraveling the memories like old bandages wrapped too tight. Growing up trying to be the version of himself everyone else wanted, shrinking parts of himself to be palatable, polite, loved. He spoke of the nights he stared at the ceiling wondering if success would ever fill the hollow space carved out by years of trying to be enough. He spoke of how Taehyung's mother's voice wasn't just hers. It was the echo of teachers, relatives, strangers who looked at him and decided he was dangerous or disposable. Taehyung listened, eyes never leaving his, each word like a knife in a balm. When Jungkook's voice cracked, Taehyung reached across the table and took his hand, his grip firm and warm, grounding. "You've always been more than enough," he whispered, and Jungkook nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I just needed someone to say it, and mean it." The next few weeks passed in a quiet kind of renewal. The group moved as a unit again, not perfectly, but with intention. Rehearsals were filled with laughter that no longer felt forced. Live streams returned, casual and chaotic, and everything the fans had missed. But what changed the most was how Jungkook and Taehyung showed up together. Not as a spectacle, not as a statement, but as something solid, real. They didn't hold back when asked questions. They didn't dodge. Instead, they leaned into each other, into the bond that had weathered distance, doubt, and disapproval. During a fan sign, a young fan nervously asked Jungkook, "Are you happy now?" And he smiled, soft and full of truth, before glancing sideways at Taehyung beside him. "I'm learning how to be," he said, and Taehyung grinned, elbowing him gently, their eyes locking in a moment that didn't need further explanation. But even peace has its tremors. One evening, as they left a recording session, Jungkook's phone buzzed with a message he hadn't expected. It was from his own mother. A photo, him and Taehyung from the performance, arms brushing, eyes bright, and a simple sentence beneath it, "I've never seen you look so free." He stared at it for a long time, his emotions folding in on themselves, a tight breath caught in his chest. "You okay?" Taehyung asked beside him, reaching for the passenger door. Jungkook turned to him, heart swollen. "She sees it too." Taehyung didn't ask what. He just nodded, his hand reaching to rest on Jungkook's thigh for a brief second, a silent "I'm here." And when Jungkook invited him home for dinner a week later, it wasn't just as a bandmate. It wasn't a test or a performance. It was a bridge. Taehyung showed up in a soft sweater and nervous smile, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine he knew Jungkook's mother liked. The dinner was quiet at first, filled with polite conversation and the clinking of forks. But then laughter started, stories flowed, and Jungkook watched the two people he loved most find common ground. As the night wore on, his mother excused herself to the kitchen and Jungkook followed. She turned to him, wiping her hands on a towel, eyes soft. "He brings you back to yourself," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you that's wrong." And Jungkook, voice low, full of awe and gratitude, whispered, "I won't." The next day, Taehyung received a message from his own mother. Just 2 words, "Thank you." And though it wasn't an apology, it was a beginning. And beginnings, Jungkook had learned, were sacred. In the studio, they recorded the final version of the song, this time with the full group, layering their voices into something that felt like a shared heartbeat. They laughed between takes, teased each other, and when it was over, Namjoon clapped his hands once, grinning. "We made it," he said, and they had, not just the song. The journey back. That night, Jungkook stood alone on the rooftop of the HYBE building, wind brushing through his hair, eyes on the city glittering below. Taehyung joined him quietly, sliding beside him without a word. They stood like that for a long time, side by side, no longer needing to fill the silence. Then Taehyung spoke, voice low. "If you ever leave the group chat again, I'm flying wherever you are and dragging you back myself." Jungkook laughed, shaking his head. "I'm not going anywhere." Taehyung turned to him, eyes serious. "Promise." Jungkook met his gaze, his voice unwavering. "I promise." And in the stillness of that night, in the honesty of that vow, they both knew it wasn't just about the chat or the group or the performances. It was about never choosing silence again when they had each other to speak into the dark. They had walked through fire and come out with something stronger than they ever expected. Not perfect, not untouched, but real, and that was everything. The night air was cool against Jungkook's skin as he stood there beside Taehyung on the rooftop, the promise still echoing between them, not loud, not dramatic, but anchoring in a way that quieted something long restless inside him. The lights of the city shimmered like a galaxy sprawled beneath their feet, and for once, Jungkook didn't feel like he had to chase anything out there. The moment was enough. The presence beside him was enough. He glanced sideways, watching the way Taehyung's hair moved with the breeze, the way his eyes reflected the cityscape below without blinking, steady and contemplative. It wasn't just the closeness that mattered anymore. It was the knowing, the shared history, the bruises they hadn't hidden from each other. Slowly, Jungkook reached out, fingers brushing the back of Taehyung's hand, a silent question without words. Taehyung didn't pull away. His hand turned slightly, linking with Jungkook, his grip firm and warm. They stood that way for a long time, not speaking, just letting the pulse between them say everything that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When they finally returned downstairs, the building was mostly dark, the hum of the city muffled by the thick glass and soundproof walls of their familiar sanctuary. Jungkook walked ahead slightly, then paused by the elevator, waiting, his head tilted back against the wall. Taehyung stepped up beside him, closer than necessary, the kind of closeness that had long stopped being about proximity and started meaning something more. Their eyes met briefly and Taehyung smiled, that subtle half-smirk that always made Jungkook's chest feel like it was holding a secret. The doors opened and they stepped inside, the soft mechanical hum accompanying them as the floor numbers blinked past. Taehyung's voice broke the silence first, low and thoughtful. "Do you think we'll ever really be done?" Jungkook didn't need clarification. He leaned against the mirrored wall, gaze soft. "With this, with us," Taehyung nodded once. Jungkook shook his head slowly. "No. Even if we stop singing, even if the lights go out, this doesn't end." Taehyung turned to him fully, his face unreadable, and for a second, Jungkook thought he might say something heavy, something defining. But instead, Taehyung simply said, "Good, because I don't think I could take losing this again." The next few days were a blur of schedules and movement. Magazine shoots, interview prep, choreography practice, the usual storm of being who they were. But through it all, something had changed. Not in the way they performed, but in the way they looked at each other when no one else was watching. There was no need to perform for each other anymore. They had already stripped everything down to the bone and rebuilt it piece by fragile piece. During one late-night rehearsal, as the rest of the group collapsed into laughter after Namjoon flubbed a lyric and Jin made it worse with a joke that didn't land, Taehyung and Jungkook found themselves in the corner of the room, stretching in silence. Jungkook was tying his shoe when Taehyung nudged him with his knee, voice quiet enough that no one else heard. "Still with me?" Jungkook glanced up, eyes locking with his. "Always." Taehyung nodded, satisfied, then leaned back onto his palms and stared at the ceiling like it held the stars they once used to chase. But not everyone was ready to let the past go. One evening when Jungkook opened his phone after practice, he found a thread of messages, old family acquaintances, distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, reacting to the performance, to the whispers online, to the growing suspicion that his bond with Taehyung had become something deeper than friendship. Some messages were supportive, kind, but others were colder, veiled behind polite concern. "Be careful what you show. People are talking. Your career is too precious to risk." He sat there in the backseat of the van, fingers numb against the screen, heart sinking beneath the weight of history repeating itself. He thought he had outrun the shadows, but they were fast, always lurking, ready to question his joy the moment it became visible. Taehyung noticed the change in his posture instantly when they got out of the van. Jungkook didn't look up when he walked. He barely spoke during vocal warm-ups. After 10 minutes of watching him fumble lines he knew by heart, Taehyung grabbed his wrist gently and pulled him aside. "What happened?" Jungkook didn't answer at first. He just showed him the phone, the messages, the words that shouldn't have mattered but did. Taehyung read them slowly, face hardening with each sentence. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. "Let me share the weight." Jungkook looked at him, eyes tired. "What if the weight crushes you too?" Taehyung stepped closer, placing his hand against Jungkook's chest. "Then we fall together, but I'd rather fall beside you than stand alone." That night they stayed late in the studio again. Not to work, just to be. Jungkook played chords on the piano, simple progressions, familiar, while Taehyung scribbled lyrics in a notebook, the tip of his tongue peeking out whenever he concentrated too hard. There was something sacred in that routine. No pressure, no performance. Just music as a language only they fully understood. When the melody shifted into something haunting, Jungkook paused, looking up. "Do you remember the first time we wrote something just for us?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "It was raining. You had just dyed your hair blonde again. You said it made you feel lighter." Jungkook laughed quietly. "It did for a while." Taehyung tilted his head. "Do you now?" Jungkook's fingers danced over the keys again. "Lighter, sometimes, but it's not about feeling light anymore. It's about feeling seen. I'd rather be heavy and honest than weightless and hiding." Taehyung reached across the piano, brushing his fingers against Jungkook's. "Then let's never hide again." The days turned into weeks. The album release neared. The world braced for another era. But for Jungkook and Taehyung, this wasn't about eras or comebacks or concepts. It was about holding onto something real in the middle of the noise. During one final listening session before the press previews, the entire group sat in the dark, the finished tracks filling the room. When their duet came on, there was a hush. Even after all the times they'd heard it, something about hearing it in full, mixed and mastered, hit differently. The room breathed with it. And when it ended, Jin whispered, "That's not just a song, that's a confession." Jungkook didn't correct him. Neither did Taehyung. The night before the album dropped, they found themselves on the rooftop again, the city alive beneath them, the sky clearer than usual. Taehyung brought a blanket and 2 cups of tea. Jungkook brought nothing but his honesty. They sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. "You know," Taehyung said after a long silence, "even if the world never understands us, even if they twist our story into something it's not, I don't care, because I know what's real, and that's you." Jungkook looked at him, the truth shining in his eyes like a sunrise he never thought he'd see again. "You're what's real too, the only thing that stayed when I didn't even recognize myself anymore." Taehyung turned, facing him fully. "So what now?" Jungkook leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper. Now we keep choosing each other every day, loudly, quietly, always. And in that moment, with no cameras, no crowds, no expectations, just the two of them and a sky full of stars, they did. They chose. And this time, there was no going back. The night hummed with a kind of stillness that didn't ask for words, the kind that wrapped itself around two people who had already said too much and still not enough. The kind of silence that echoed with every step they had taken toward each other, and every step they had almost taken away. On the rooftop, wrapped in the warmth of an oversized blanket Taehyung had pulled over their shoulders, Jungkook could feel the weight of the city beneath them, the murmur of the world moving on without knowing how much had changed up here, in this small, quiet space where no one was watching and everything was real. Taehyung's fingers played with the seam of the blanket absent-mindedly, his gaze flickering between Jungkook's face and the distant blinking of lights in the buildings beyond. The air between them pulsed softly, filled with unspoken agreements, the kind that only came from hearts that had learned each other's scars by touch. Jungkook exhaled slowly, his voice barely above the wind. "Do you think it's always going to feel like this?" Taehyung didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted slightly closer, their knees now brushing, their shared warmth beating back the chill that had settled over the concrete. "Like what?" he finally asked, voice rough with truth. Jungkook looked ahead, his throat tight. "Like we're one step away from losing what we just found again." Taehyung was quiet for a moment and then he reached out, his fingers curling around Jungkook's wrist, grounding. "No," he said, "not anymore, because this time I know exactly what I'd be losing." Jungkook turned his head slowly, eyes meeting Taehyung's with a vulnerability so naked it almost hurt, but there was no fear there now, only understanding. "You're not scared." Taehyung smiled, soft and tired and a little broken, the kind of smile that came from surviving something with your soul barely intact. "I'm terrified, but I'm more scared of silence than I am of love." They didn't speak after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes connection was a quiet thing, not needing to be spoken to be felt. The album dropped at midnight, and somewhere beneath them, fans were crying, screaming, decoding lyrics line by line, trying to piece together the truth behind the sound. But up here, they didn't refresh charts, didn't scroll reactions. Taehyung leaned his head against Jungkook's shoulder, and Jungkook tilted his own until their cheeks brushed. The closeness wasn't new, but this time, it wasn't hidden. It wasn't something they'd explain away later in a variety show or deflect with a joke. It simply was. When they finally made their way down from the rooftop, the building was empty except for the soft glow of hallway lights and the distant hum of something mechanical behind the walls. Taehyung's hand brushed Jungkook as they walked, their fingers naturally falling into place together without ceremony, just instinct, like gravity finally doing what it was always meant to. They didn't let go until they reached the lobby, where their manager was waiting to take them home, oblivious to the shift that had occurred in the silence of the night. The ride was quiet. Jungkook stared out the window, his reflection pale against the glass, but his eyes soft, no longer heavy with the weight of being misunderstood. When they reached his apartment first, he hesitated at the door of the van. Taehyung reached forward, catching his sleeve. "Come over tomorrow?" he asked, voice low. Jungkook turned, and for a second something flickered across his face, fear, maybe, or longing, or both. But then he nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Yeah, I will." The next morning they weren't trending because of the song. They were trending because of a single photo, blurry, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed them leaving the building together, fingers intertwined, Taehyung's head tilted just slightly toward Jungkook like he was mid-laugh. No caption, no scandal, just proof. And the internet, as always, split in two. Some fans rejoiced, their timelines flooded with heart emojis and crying gifs, writing paragraphs about how they'd always known. Others speculated, dissected, doubted. The media latched on, headlines forming before breakfast had even ended. Jungkook saw it all unfold from his kitchen, spooning cereal into a bowl without looking down, eyes scanning a world that was now asking questions neither of them had the energy to answer. He didn't feel panic, though, not anymore. He just felt tired. He sent one message, short and clear. "You saw it. Taehyung replied almost instantly. Let them. And that was it. That was the moment they stopped hiding, not because they wanted the attention, but because hiding had become heavier than the truth. They didn't issue statements. They didn't do interviews. They simply kept showing up, to practice, to dinners, to photo shoots, together. HYBE remained quiet, surprisingly. No damage control, no press management. Maybe they had learned after all this time that some stories didn't need corporate polish. Or maybe, just maybe, they saw the way the public was shifting, how the world had changed while they'd been surviving. Still, not everyone accepted it. A few sponsors pulled back. A few endorsement talks went cold. But the fans, the ones who mattered, stood louder. And the ones who left, well, Jungkook had long since learned that not everyone who clapped for you wanted you to win. That night, as promised, he showed up at Taehyung's place. No cameras, no staff, no pretense. Just two boys who had become men in the spotlight trying to find out what it meant to be real in a world that often demanded illusion. They cooked together badly. Burned rice, oversalted soup, laughter spilling into the small kitchen like they had never broken. Later, sitting on the floor with records playing in the background, Jungkook leaned against Taehyung's side, a quiet question pressing at the edge of his mind. Do you regret it? Taehyung didn't ask what he meant. He knew. He always knew. He shook his head slowly, hand reaching to thread through Jungkook's hair, slow and tender. No, not a single part of it, not even the painful ones, because they led us here. Jungkook let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his head resting against Taehyung's chest now. Me neither. And when sleep came, it came easily. Not with fear or guilt, but with the kind of safety that only existed when you stopped pretending. In the morning, when the world tried again to pull them apart with whispers and expectations, they simply walked forward, together. Not louder, not bolder, but steadier. Because love, real love, didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needed to be lived, quietly, fully, freely. And this time they weren't letting go. The morning light was subdued as it spilled through Taehyung's bedroom window, brushing across the quiet outlines of two bodies tangled in the unmade sheets. The faint sound of a slow song playing from a nearby speaker, barely audible above the gentle rhythm of their breathing. Jungkook stirred first, his lashes fluttering open to the soft light pooling across the hardwood floor, and for a moment he didn't move, allowing himself the unfamiliar peace of waking up beside someone without the need to rush, to run, to hide. Taehyung's arm was draped over his waist, his face buried against the curve of Jungkook's neck, and the weight of his presence was not heavy. It was grounding, like gravity had finally found the place it was always meant to hold him. Jungkook blinked slowly, his gaze settling on the ceiling, and in the stillness he could feel his heartbeat sinking to the warmth beside him. There had been so many mornings before this, mornings alone, mornings full of tension and questions and buried things, but this one was different. This morning asked for nothing. It simply allowed. Taehyung stirred not long after, shifting against him with a soft hum, his voice low and rough with sleep. "You're awake." Jungkook didn't speak. He just nodded, and Taehyung pressed a lazy kiss to his shoulder before burying his face in the pillow again, his fingers curling lightly around the edge of Jungkook's shirt. They stayed like that until the sun had climbed higher, until the world outside the window began to murmur its usual noise, cars passing, birds calling, a faint siren far in the distance. But none of it touched the silence between them. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred. When they finally rose, it was slow, deliberate, moving through the apartment like time itself had softened around them. They moved in rhythm, Jungkook boiling water for tea while Taehyung folded the blankets from the night before, their shoulders brushing, their laughter unfiltered. It wasn't long before their phones began to buzz again, tiny reminders of the world they lived in, the world that now pulsed with curiosity and assumption. Jungkook opened one message and found a text from their label, not harsh, but cautious. "Let us know how you'd like to handle the growing speculation." He stared at the screen, unmoving. He didn't need to ask Taehyung if he had received the same. He had. They both knew this day would come. The day the blurred lines became clear enough that no one could deny what they saw. Taehyung joined him at the counter, peering over his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" Jungkook set the phone down. "I'm thinking I'm tired of shaping my life into something palatable." Taehyung exhaled, reaching for his mug. "So let's not." And just like that, a decision was made, not with statements or press releases, but with choice. They would no longer offer silence as explanation.